Hey guys, so this is a very tragic way to end 2024. Korea is mourning the loss of 179 passengers from Jeju Air Flight 2216. The accident happened over the weekend on Sunday morning Korea time, 9:07 a.m. at Muan International Airport, which is a regional hub in South Jeolla Province. This plane was coming back from Bangkok. It left in the early hours, like 1:35 a.m. in Bangkok, and it was supposed to land 8:30 a.m. in Korea. And as you've probably seen right now from a lot of the reports, there was a tragic accident on the runway. It was full of holiday travelers, this plane, and a lot of them were on a special Christmas tour package. Some of them may have even attended the Asian Artists Awards, the big K-pop award show that happened right at the same time in Bangkok. It's the deadliest aviation accident that happened in Korea, and it's the third most deadliest that involves a Korean airline. But who's to blame? What happened? Was this just a cascade of many different unfortunate events, or was there really one big cause? It's being said that a bird strike that got into the engine precipitated the accident that then prevented the pilots from being able to access the landing gear. But why would the landing gear fail in such a situation when there are backup systems on this Boeing 737? Was that a contributing cause? We're still looking through the wreckage of the evidence. And again, is Korea's emergency management, prevention, and response system again to be condemned after the Seoul Ferry incident and the Halloween crowd crush incident? Is there a system failure going on in Korea? Because the common theme of all these different tragedies in different locations under very different circumstances, but the common thing is that families that were not expecting an accident whatsoever on this scale to happen, happened. And they will now have to deal with this trauma for the rest of their lives. Even though officials always say after big accidents like this, it's going to take months to find out the reason. We're going to have to find the black box, which apparently is one of them is damaged, by the way. It's going to take weeks to even just get into the black box. But people are always asking, why did this happen? What caused this crash? To make sense of this and to, I guess, alleviate some of the anxiety. And then also, of course, the victims and the families of the victims really want to know why. There were 181 total people on board, including passengers and crew, and the only two people who survived were two flight attendants at the way rear of the airplane. Apparently, upon impact, a lot of people flew out of the plane, and because they didn't dump the fuel for some reason, that caused an explosion. It seems as if in this situation that there were a lot of missteps. When systems are stressed, people don't go to the finish line. People don't do that extra safety check or the extra measure to prevent an accident. So the way that it looks like here, a lot of people have medium-sized culpability, but when you add them all together, it turns into a disaster. And I think it's exactly one of these scenarios where each individual contributing factor was the result of a decision where people are like, well, why should we waste resources on this? Or I don't have time to do this for something that might happen. But exactly in this type of high stakes scenario where your life is on the line and you don't have a lot of time to make decisions, that is exactly why you spend resources on safety measures, mechanisms, plan B, C, D, E, F, G for a scenario that you hope will never happen. But if it does, people in the past trying to protect people in the future are the ones that will probably get their angel wings and go to heaven, and the ones that cut the corners will probably get an express ticket to hell, because that is exactly when you want to have and thank the universe that you were able to survive or have a chance, because somebody created that margin of safety, covering a margin of error way before you. You don't even know probably who they are. So the contributing factors that we know so far from this is the landing gear, birds, the backup system failed, there was a concrete wall, and they didn't dump the fuel. And the universe may be sending a signal, or it could be conspiracy theory, or maybe even some black magic by them shamans again, because the day after this accident, another Jeju Air flight had a landing gear problem, and thankfully nobody was hurt from that incident. But it took off from Seoul at Gimpo International Airport at 6:37 a.m. They detected an issue with the landing gear shortly after takeoff, so they turned around and returned to Gimpo about an hour later. And so even after this tragic incident, again, in the same airline with the same type of airplane, there was an issue with the same exact landing gear, but this was not precipitated by any bird attack that exploded one of the engines. This was without any stressors. So again, this is creating a situation where people are on high alert, and it has thankfully got the ball rolling where the government is trying to now institute a widespread investigation and review of Korea's airline industry. But back to the fatal accident on Sunday morning. 175 passengers were on board, 6 crew members were also on board for a total of 181 passengers. Again, only 2 crew members survived, and they were at the end, and they must have had some trauma, because one of the flight attendants who woke up in the hospital said, like, they had no memory. They just literally just woke up in the hospital. Now, what caused the actual fatalities was that there was an explosion of the airplane after it landed. It landed without the landing gear, and it did a belly landing, which essentially means like you don't have the wheels and you're just trying to land as smooth as possible on the runway and hoping that gravity or friction will slow down the airplane in time. And it hit a concrete wall, which caused the explosion. And so now, a couple days after the accident, that wall is becoming very suspect and being looked at very closely as a cause of the accident. And whether, if that wall weren't there, if the plane had just gone, could it have survived and not created an explosion? The thing that looks really sus about that wall, and I think that wall was a critical failure, because apparently that wall was to raise up the level of a landing device, and it had been covered in dirt to make it look not like a concrete wall, apparently. And so if you were the pilot, are you checking your notes and saying like, well, this is a concrete wall, but it's been covered in dirt and now there's grass on it, so, but it's really a concrete wall, so we better not hit it. To the pilot, I'm surmising, the pilot probably thought that, well, it's a dirt wall. We're going to try this. If we crash into the dirt, maybe there's in the training, aviation experts, please let me know. Like if you crash into dirt, that's probably okay. And they probably thought that maybe even that would be helpful to slow down the plane. But if it's concrete, no, not at all. So that was a problem. The fact that the plane didn't go around and dump the fuel, that was a problem. This was the second go around when they landed. So they were able to control the plane somewhat, but then again, the black box needs to tell us whether there was the ability to fly around again and dump the fuel, or was it a situation where we can't go around because we've lost control of the plane? We better get the landing on. The problem also was that the runway was a little bit, by standard wise, they say that, regulation wise, it's a fine runway. But the way that it's a fine runway when things are going okay and everything is going perfectly. But for this airplane, it was traveling too fast, and it looked like the pilots had to make a decision between landing early or trying to slow down the plane as much as possible before you want to do the belly landing. Think about it. If you're just going to say like, okay, we're traveling fast, but we have to make sure we get landed at the start of the runway. Well, that might be too much force because it's too quick. On the other hand, if you're saying like, well, let's try to slow down as much as possible before we land, you've used up half of your runway. And so you got to really hope that you're going to stop by half of runway's worth of distance. And that's essentially what it looked like happened. They flew over about half of the runway and then were hoping that they would slide and then stop. But I don't think they anticipated a concrete wall. And even pilots, when they have their 20/20 vision, if they were looking and if they saw an actual concrete wall, I think they would have made a much different decision. The fact that this concrete mound was covered up with dirt, I think was the critical error here. And we're seeing that already. The airport officials are saying like, well, there's nothing wrong with having a concrete wall there, and other airports in Korea and around the world have concrete walls as well. But I don't know if they, plant a garden on top of it.
It should never have a wall anywhere near the runway, nowhere near it. I would say that absolutely contravenes international standards to have that wall there. No question about it.
They were raising the device up to do the autopilot system. And so, well, that's fine and good, but can't you do that in a tower, like a structure that where, God forbid, if an airplane had to use the extra space, it could just plow right through.
So it started to slide the runway, and then it skirted the runway and it hit the localizer antenna. And here I have the questions for those who built this antenna. Why is it so freaking robust?
And I think that's what they were probably hoping and thinking, that they could plow through and go into some of the dead area of the airport without a runway, and would have been fine if it was probably just dirt.
The airplane was stopped by this concrete, reinforced concrete, just immediately. Just look how thick this wall really is. And also there was the ground on the top. Well, usually those localizer antennas look like that. And if you want to make them higher for one or other reason, you don't need really to build a concrete wall. You may put some sort of the metal tower.
On board there were 82 men, 93 women, and they ranged in age from 3 to 78 years old. The majority were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. What we know from the control tower was that the airport control tower warned of a bird strike at around 8:54 a.m. The pilot declared Mayday at 8:59 a.m. We do have some netizen video of somebody it looked like at an apartment or an airport hotel nearby that saw the airplane, and one of the engines had exploded on descent. And they landed the plane at 9:03 a.m. without the landing gear deployed. And the disaster was announced officially to have happened at 9:07 a.m. And amidst all of the political crisis in Korea, we're on our second acting president. So the first president, Han Duck-soo, got impeached. And then now we're at the second acting president, Choi Sang-mok. He declared Muan a special disaster zone, and he declared a 7-day mourning period for Korea that will last until midnight on Saturday, Korea time. We've heard from the Jeju Air CEO. He issued an apology and said that regardless of the cause, I will take full responsibility as the CEO. But again, as in the Sewol Ferry disaster, eyes are going to go above the CEO and go straight to the holding company, Aegeon Group, AK Group for short, and see what kind of management failures there could have been there, what systemic risks could have been there that affected this tragedy over at Jeju Air. The reason why I'm giving a little bit of a side eye to the airline management and the parent company is that the head of the management support office did say, yes, well, we can cover, support for you guys because of our $1 billion insurance plan. Yes, it's good to have insurance. Yes, and yes, it's good to announce it. But his following statement seemed a little bit weird because without investigating first, he said, this crash is not about maintenance issues. There can't be any compromise maintaining aircraft. But are you really on the ground? Do you really, really, really know? Especially when we have other reports and eyewitness accounts saying that these maintenance staff is overworked, and because this is a low-cost carrier, these planes are in rotation a lot more. But he also said, we will leave no stone unturned, or we do leave no stone unturned when it comes to maintenance work before takeoffs. Now, so they could say definitely, we know this for a fact because we obviously manage the airline, but he was so quick to say, like, it's not our fault. You can't say the schedule was overwhelming. We follow a predetermined schedule for maintenance checks. So perhaps the management system is sound and good, but in a lot of these accidents and tragedies, the plan is good. The people who create the systems are not like some idiots who are not knowing what they're doing. It's usually, I've seen most of these types of situations where there's a tragedy, the official rules, everything that's on the book is world-class standards, but it's whether there were shortcuts taken after, you publish the manual and say like, well, this is what we do, but what do you actually do? And that's going to be under a lot of investigation over at Jeju Air, because if you had any doubt, the next day there was another problem with the landing gear on a different airplane. Now, what is Jeju Air and who owns Jeju Air? So again, Aegeon Group, which is a mid-tier conglomerate, multi-billion dollars in revenue a year, owns Jeju Air. Jeju Air is actually the third largest airline in Korea behind Korean Air, Asiana Air, then it's Jeju Air. And Jeju Air was the first low-cost carrier. There was this regulation passed in the mid-2000s where you can start an airline, and a lot of people opted for the low-cost carrier route, sort of like the Southwest or JetBlue, Air Asia of Korea. And so a lot of people started airlines, and even the big Korean Air and Asiana Air started their own version of low-cost carriers. So it's a little bit, I was like, oh, that's a little bit fake, because it was supposed to enhance competitiveness in the airline industry and not make it such a monopoly. But just so you know, Asiana Airlines owns Air Busan and Air Seoul, and Korean Air owns Jin Air. So those three low-cost carriers may look like, oh, they're just independent, but they're owned by the big two conglomerates. And now Asiana Airlines this year was acquired by Korean Air. So there's going to be a merger of the two airlines, the biggest airlines in Korea, and create like this virtual monopoly. And y'all know I love Korean Air. I think it's the world's best airline, but I also do not like this kind of situation where there's going to be a monopoly, prices are going to go up and a lot of oversight might go here or there because there's just going to be too much power. And we all know that Incheon, even the city, is essentially like dominated. It's owned by the Korean Air holding group Hanjin. They run that town. So Jeju Air entered the market in 2005. Its first flight was in 2006. And in the earlier part of its existence, I even took a flight on Jeju Air, and I think it was even an international flight, either it's Hong Kong, Taiwan, somewhere a little bit regional. And I was pleasantly surprised. And I'm not surprised that it is the third largest airline and is the biggest and best low-cost carrier, because I thought they did a really great job, and it really was like AirAsia, JetBlue, or Southwest. You got what you paid for, but a little bit more. And other airlines, some of the other, oh my goodness, like the T-way seats were really right in front of me, and I never experienced that before. I thought like, people were exaggerating when they're saying like the seats are like here. Well, that's what was on the T-way. Now the problem with a lot of these low-cost carriers, not just in Korea, is that the favorite airplane that fits the business model that makes sense is the Boeing 737-800. And so this is the plane that was involved in this fatal incident, and then also the following day, the other landing gear issue. But back to AK Group, you may know them now in this modern era from the 2080, 2080, 28 toothpaste, and the Trio dishwasher liquid. So they started as a soap manufacturer, and it started in 1945 as Taeryong Industrial, and then it changed its name to Aegyeong Industrial Corporation and specialized in soap in 1954. And the name Aegyeong means love and respect, and it focused on consumer goods in the 1950s. It expanded into chemicals and then retail and department stores in the 1990s, and then aviation and real estate development in the 2000s. The chairwoman is actually the husband of the founder, the chairman, but in the 1970s, he had passed away from a heart attack, and she was like one of the original girl bosses. She really flouted conventions at the time. Well, she had to take care of the family business. She was a housewife, and she is being credited as growing this company into such a great business, not focusing on M&As, but really focusing on the fundamentals of creating good businesses and improving on them. And so they had a lot of great success with their soaps and their cosmetics and their chemical industry. And, she was, she's still alive. She is like credited as, she's a baller. I mean, in the 1973, there was an oil shock. And so they couldn't get the raw goods to make their soaps and run their factories. So she met with the president of Gulf Oil and then made trade deals internationally. Like, she just made things happen. So today, her three sons and daughter lead the group's three main business divisions: consumer products and airlines, chemicals, and retail and property development. The 2000s, like 2000 to 2010, that was apparently like, one of the best eras for them. But right now, there's a bit of questions because their retail group is suffering. And so the AK Plaza, which I guess is like a department store type of, retail and real estate development at the same time. One reporter just back in April called it a bottomless pit because it's just not making enough money and it's putting a strain on the other parts of the business. So AK's chemical subsidiary, their paint manufacturing division, had to pour in some money to support AK Plaza. And this is either the plus or minuses or both. however it turns out, of having a family conglomerate. When you're in trouble, then the other divisions can come in and help you out. But at the same time, how much is being sacrificed from those other divisions? How much time and attention is being taken away to save a struggling unit? Of course, that's just any kind of business. But at the same time, was there some sort of distraction or strain or financial pressure put on Jeju Air to help some of the ailing parts of the business? This is why then, Korean people, they're just not, they'll be like, the CEO, you're just hired. We need to go where the real power and the decisions are made above you, into the boardroom of the holding company. And mainly the holding company, and also in this case with AK, is controlled by a family. And so those family members are going to be put under a lot of scrutiny. Now, people who have observed this situation, without, what we're operating right now is to at least try to move to the next stage of what questions should we ask now that we've seen some of the initial situation and data. And people were saying that the plane, yes, was approaching very quickly. And so already that's almost like a lose-lose scenario. You're approaching the runway. You've been on an airplane before where it feels like the plane is landing a little bit too fast, but at least you got the wheels. And, maybe there's like a hard landing, but at least you got the wheels. Imagine what it is when it's too fast without the wheels. And so some people are wondering, why was there such a rush to get the airplane to the ground? We've seen in other crisis scenarios with airplanes is that they circle around for as long as they can to make sure there's not an explosion. Either you dump the fuel, and perhaps this airplane, because of whatever bird intrusion that created an explosion in one of the engines, maybe that debilitated the ability to dump fuel, or maybe there's not a feature to dump fuel. But then in that case, you've seen airplanes just circle around until they burn off all of the fuel so that when they land, there's the lowest possibility of an explosion from the fuel. So that is a big question. Why was there such a rush to get the airplane down on the ground? Was there a really critical malfunction in the plane itself that you're not going to let you, fly around and, do the loop-de-loop until the gas gets burned off? Also, the hydraulics have a backup. Apparently there are 3 chances to get the wheels out, and the one that is the most last ditch effort is a manual, kind of a releaser pulley that will release the landing gear. Why did that not work either? And again, there was a situation of the pilots having to make this trade-off decision, either touch down early at a higher speed or go down halfway, waste half of the runway and try to lower the speed and then do the belly landing. Again, couldn't they have looped around a bit more and then tried to reduce the speed further out than you normally would so that you can do a belly landing earlier? Of course, these are all these things like, the, what do you call it? Like the recliner quarterback that, you can't just be like, well, why not this? Why not that? In the moment, in a high stress environment, you might, you can't really go over all those things, not all the time. On the other hand, that is why you have such a set of systems and protocols and training of these pilots so that they can make more of these decisions in a higher stressed environment than what normal people would not be able to do, they would be able to do. So again, the concrete wall at the end of the runway that provided the collision that created the explosion is being looked at very closely because it's now being described as a concrete mound. So again, that it was covered in dirt to probably make it blend in. Maybe if it was a landscaping design decision that flouted rules of the airport, that is one tragic mistake. And the reason why I bring up the airport, why Korean people would also be suspicious of these airports, was that a lot of these regional airports are not big enough to really handle the demand. A lot of these regional airports are stressed because there was a build first and then try to make the economic model later type of philosophy. If you're looking at systemic risks in the Korean system and probably in, a lot of other countries as well, these airports are huge pet projects for local businesses and the politicians, most likely accepting the kickbacks in behind. You have a huge budget to create an airport. Obviously, a lot of that money is going to go into the secret bank accounts of the people managing or bringing that project to that region, and having an incentive to push it through without really stress testing the economic fundamentals. If it were a private organization, even though private corporations have their own corruption, I wonder how many of them would actually move forward with running an airport if you really look at the fundamentals. But because it's a government institution, you don't really have to be as critical with the business fundamentals, especially if you're going to go out of office in a few years. You collect your bag and you go. And so I could see how, because a lot of these airports are stressed, again, then there is fewer resources that are going to go to things that might happen. This mound was 250 meters at the end of the runway, and it held up the localizer. So the localizer is that device that helps with the auto landing, and it sends the signal to the plane to give the distance data so that the computers can make their calculations. Do you think a mound 250 meters from the end of a runway is going to get a lot of priority at a struggling airport where maybe there's not even enough toilet paper in the bathrooms? So I could see how that could be overlooked, and especially when you're like, who's going to crash into at the end of the runway, except when it happens. So it's a 2-meter tall structure covered with dirt, including the localizer. It's 4 meters high. And so airport officials said that this mound was raised to keep the localizer level with the runway because the runway at the end is slanted. So again, that looks like covering up for a design flaw or defect, or again, I don't think the design was probably flawed. It was probably the implementation, probably like slant it down, like save a little bit of the gravel, I guess, during the construction of it, and send like one kid to like one semester of college with the kickback money. I don't know, something like that. Those types of things. And so that needs to be really looked at and analyzed, because was there a mismatch? I think there was a mismatch with the pilot's assumption of what that mound was. How would you know that underneath the cute little dirt and a little bit of rocks or grass was going to be concrete? And apparently, as we've seen, a plane can't win against even a concrete mound. I looked it up. Concrete actually is even weaker than steel. So if it's not going to win against steel, not going to win against concrete even. So obviously it won't win against, it can't cut through steel like butter. So the Transport Ministry also said that the localizer on a concrete structure is normal in other airports in the country. So they may really have to rethink that design now that if it turns out that had the concrete mound not been there, the plane could have just kept skidding along and eventually stopped. Because I believe if the pilots knew that it was a concrete mound and not just a dirt mound, they would have taken another loop-de-loop and then focused on the fuel. But if there was a problem with the plane and they're thinking like, well, you know, it's a higher risk to fly around than to go into dirt, I think that would probably be a rational decision. However, if they knew it was concrete, then I think that no matter how faulty the plane was, then it shifts the problem matrix to crap. There's no way that we can have this fuel on board, so we're going to have to try to jalopy this plane as much as we can to solve the fuel problem. But if you were given a mound of dirt as false advertising, then that creates a false data point to make a decision that is rational, but the wrong one. I don't know what kind of stuff is in the air with like some weird juju in the air, because Air Canada's aircraft caught fire hours after this tragedy. KLM in Oslo also skidded off the runway on a Boeing 737 because of a hydraulic failure. And then we're even looking just hours ago at LAX, there was almost a collision of two airplanes on the runway. What is going on? So the government said that it's going to conduct a safety inspection of all Boeing 737-800 aircraft. Jeju Air has the most number of 737-800s in Korea. They operate 39. T-Way has 27, Jin Air 19, and E-Star Jet with 10. Other people are pointing to the high utilization rate of the aircraft at Jeju Air as a possible factor in the crash. That also may have had some effect. However, Jeju Air says, do not blame our maintenance and safety protocols. You know, we're all good there. Jeju Air is not going to lean towards being blamed because of its maintenance, but other people will look at its maintenance. That's good. Jeju Air probably will focus on maybe the aircraft malfunctions or defects or the airport. So it's good that different agencies and different stakeholders are looking at this problem through different lenses, because there's no one lens that's going to be fair to everything. We have to really have people try to pursue the truth from different angles, although at the same time, you don't want one person's agenda-driven angle to block out the evidence of other evidence. So this is going to be a real tough situation. I don't even know if we're going to get to the real truth of it. But looking at it now, after a day or so from the accident, I think that we have never seen a mound of dirt be so potentially guilty in such a big tragedy. All right, guys, what do you think? Put your comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.